Yeah, don't leave anybody out. Don't leave anybody out. We ready here, Jimmy? Good afternoon. It's good afternoon in the state's capital. We're welcoming some new legislators from both parties. I look forward to working with them. We're going to be rolling out a budget today. I want to thank the hardworking people at the Office of Financial Management for working so hard yet again to put together a budget that I believe addresses the real needs of the state of Washington, that acts with urgency and with audacity and at the scale we need to address our challenges in the state of Washington. And there's a lot of great things going on in the state of Washington, but despite all of our efforts the last several years, we still have some challenges yet unmet. And I want to start with the challenge of homelessness. Homelessness is a housing crisis. That's the first thing I want to say about it. Homelessness is a housing deficit. We do not have enough housing for the people of the state of Washington. In the last decade, we've grown about 1 million people in the state of Washington, but we've only grown about 315,000 housing units. We cannot fix homelessness unless we build more housing. And unfortunately, the market conditions exist that the private market will not produce the housing units we need to actually house the people who live in the state of Washington. Now, that may seem an obvious fact, but it needs to be said because people demand a solution to homelessness. Washingtonians will not accept this continuous scourge of homelessness in our society. They do not believe the state of Washington, the beautiful evergreen state, is a place for chronic, rampant homelessness, and they're asking us to take bold action to do something about it. And in my budget, we intend to do just that. This is a big challenge. We have about 25,400 people experiencing homelessness of one type or another in the state of Washington. And despite the significant efforts we have made in the last several years, that is an increase from 22,000 in 2020. Now, why has this occurred? Fundamentally, it has occurred because we have not built the housing, the roofs that people need to live under. Vacancy rates have gone down. Rents have gone up. Why? Because we are a tremendously popular state. The world wants to live in Washington state for good reason. They want to work here for good reason, and they are moving here literally in the hundreds of thousands while we are not building housing. Rents have gone up, and people have fallen off the ladder of the ability to pay rents. Our population is still growing. We need to build about 50,000 housing units a year just to keep up, and we're about 5,000 to 7,000 of that short every single year. So we have some serious work to do. Now, the good news is that we know the things that work. We know that we have been doing things that have worked. In the last several years, during my administration, we have added over $500 million of housing support for people in the state of Washington. And that has helped people dramatically in their lives in so many different ways. Now, we know building housing is one of those issues, but providing people mental health and chemical addiction treatment and vocational training, all of those things go together to help people end chronic homelessness. And we know when we do these things, people do restore meaningful lives. They get back to their families. They get back to work. They get healthy. And it's very encouraging to me when we see this happening. I was down in Vancouver a month or two ago. I met a young man who is in a tiny home village. And he was showing me his home, which was, small. It's like 8 by 10, a tiny home in this village. And what he told me, he says, this isn't a lot to look at, but this has saved my life, literally. He says, it saved my life. And he kind of teared up when he told me this, because it allowed me to be stable so that I could then deal with my chemical addiction problem, which I'm dealing with, and it's allowing me to restore my whole life. That story can be repeated and is being repeated by the thousands across the state of Washington. So we know the things that we're doing are working, but they're not large enough, they're not rapid enough, and they are not disparate enough. we need to up our game when it comes to scale on these issues. So we need to increase our efforts dramatically, not just incrementally, but dramatically. We're not going to solve the problem of over 20,000 people homelessness unless we build, and unless we build quickly, and unless we provide support for many of the people in these programs who need more than a roof. They also need mental health treatment. They need chemical addiction treatment. And in our proposal, we are building in the support systems that allow people, once they get inside out of the rain, actually can deal with their challenges to get away from chronic homelessness. So we are going to ask the legislature this year to make a substantial and audacious change in our housing efforts. I'm proposing that we invest in an additional $4 billion over the next 6 years to tackle this homelessness crisis in the state of Washington. The reason for that number is that that is what is required to get the job done. This is a reality-based budget. It is not based on wishes or hopes or dreams. It is not based on the theory that somehow you can dream away homelessness or you can vaporize people that you feel inconvenient living on the corner. It is based on a reality that this investment is necessary both because we care about our fellow citizens and we want to reduce crime and we want to reduce the squalor in our communities. Now, to finance that $4 billion, I am proposing that we increase the bonding capacity of the state of Washington by classifying the bonds in a certain manner that's consistent with our Constitution. To do that, it will take a referendum of the people. The people need to vote on this. And I'm asking the legislature to send this proposal to Washingtonians. And I believe Washingtonians want to see this problem solved. I fundamentally believe this homelessness problem is inconsistent with our vision of a healthy evergreen state. And I think it's the right thing to do to submit this to the voters to allow them to join us in making this commitment. So we're going to work with the legislature on this proposal. Now, if the legislatures have other ways to finance this, we are open to ideas, but this is the one I think is consistent as to the scale of what needs to be done. This also is important to do this now. We just can't spend a decade with small bites of the apple here. We got to get going right now. Some of the things we've put in our budget in the last session are now coming online. It's a joy to me to see the success, the relative success of our right-of-way initiative, which has moved people off of our highways and into all kinds of different shelter. I was thrilled to go to the Catalyst Center in Spokane, which is going to have housing for 100 people. It's a converted motel. We've got people off of Department of Transportation homeless encampment into a stable place where they will have mental health treatment and chemical addiction treatment. But we need to replicate that many, many times across the state of Washington. And we need to do it now, not 10 years from now. This bonding proposal will allow us to do this, to make big steps now rather than tiny steps over the next several decades. Our proposal, I think, is wise in that it is comprehensive as well. There is no single solution to homelessness. We need a range of solutions. We need permanent housing. We need transitional housing. We need transitional housing with mental health and chemical addiction and vocational training. We need additional shelters. We need additional tiny home villages. We need the whole spectrum of the ability to help people get back on their feet. Our proposal will address all of the spectrums in this regard. So I'm excited about our housing proposal, but it is not enough. It is not our only challenge in the state of Washington. We also have a challenge with behavioral health. We have a significant shortage of mental health supports for Washingtonians. We have launched an effort in 2018 to reform how we provide mental health services to Washingtonians, and that effort is underway. We've made significant changes to bring more community support where people live rather than just large hospitals. We just are in the cusp of opening the first teaching mental health care hospital in American history at the UW. I was out there the other day. It's a beautiful facility. We've made excellent progress in building our community-based systems. We know it works, but it is not enough. We know that the mental health challenges Washingtonians have faced have increased faster than our growth is occurring. So we need to continue and expand our efforts. We need to make sure, as a pivotal first step, to fund in this biennium the 350-bed forensic hospital at Western State. This is absolutely imperative. We need to continue to improve our intensive care for our young folks. We know that our young people are suffering mental health challenges that are unprecedented. I was at Ingram High School talking to students about this the other day, and we need to expand the capacity, particularly of crisis care, which my budget does. We are also seeing a demand for restoration of competency. That's the competency of people to stand trial. And there has been a deluge of increased demand in this regard. There's been a 60% increase in total court orders since 2018 and a 145% increase since 2013. This exponential growth is unsupportable. We need to do two things. We need to continue our existing efforts to build capacity, which we are doing in multiple places in the state of Washington, to as rapidly as humanly possible build capacity to help restore competency for folks in the criminal justice system. But we also have to have a new approach to have people, to get them in the mental health care system rather than the criminal justice system, because we are spending millions and millions of dollars in the criminal justice system that isn't actually repairing the mental health of the citizens, which is our ultimate goal, so they won't reoffend. That's where we should be spending our money. So we are going to be working with legislators to reorient our incentive packages, if you will, to get some of these folks, lower level defendants for lower level crimes, into the mental health care system where they can be appropriately treated. And we'll be working with legislators to get that job done. It makes sense, it'll be more effective, and it'll save taxpayers hundreds of millions, or at least tens of millions of dollars. We'll need the cooperation of prosecutors and local communities to get that job done, but I hope that we can accomplish this. Look, lawyers and lawsuits are not a solution to mental health challenges for people. Mental health treatment is, and we need to get folks into the mental health care system where they belong, and we intend to get that job done. Third issue that we need big steps on, and that's our continued efforts to fight climate change and save the beautiful natural conditions and healthy conditions for our children in the state of Washington. Since our last budget, we've done fantastic things. I am proud to say that Washington State has the best clean energy policies in the United States for quite a variety of reasons. We have the most aggressive approach to fight climate change in the United States. And as I go around the country, people are frankly envious of the work we're doing. I was just on a call this morning with experts from around the United States who are working on electric car charging station infrastructure. And they're looking to Washington State for leadership, and we are showing it. But unfortunately, the climate change is continuing to accelerate. The temperature of our waters continues to increase. The melt of our glaciers continued. Our forests continue to deteriorate. And so we've got to keep up our efforts. So now, because we've sort of adopted the infrastructure, if you will, of our climate change action, now we have to focus on implementation and investment. So we want to make sure Washingtonians can power their cars and ultimately their homes with 100% clean electricity. And this budget provides resources for our agencies to improve siting and permitting for clean energy sites around the state of Washington so that we can get that job done. One way we can do this is through our new Clean Energy Siting Council, which we are proposing, which can bring together multiple agencies to expedite effective, comprehensive, and community-based siting decisions. We're going to also propose to provide tribes with funding that they need to build capacity to be able to effectively evaluate potential clean energy sites and appropriately work with the state to make good decisions to minimize environmental degradation associated with them. We also think it's very important to help local communities build up their permitting capacity. One of the difficulties we have is that local cities and counties simply don't have the person power to do the permitting work that is required. So we're going to provide some incentives and help for local communities to do that using homegrown talent, and I hope legislators will agree with us. Now, the things we are proposing, I'm very happy to say, have been essentially enabled by the Climate Commitment Act. It's allowing us to invest in our communities, from electric ferries to EV chargers, to providing heat pumps for people, to building a new clean energy innovation institute at Washington State University in the Tri-Cities that we announced a couple days ago. These are unprecedented investments, and they are based on the sense of innovation that we have in the state of Washington. But we need to do more than just those things. We need to really help our salmon survive. And our salmon are on the ropes. And we've made enormous investments, from increasing our efforts to restore culverts, to have nearshore habitat. We've done a lot of work, but we haven't done enough, particularly in providing them water that is cold enough for them to survive. Our waters are now becoming too hot, literally, for salmon to survive. We lost almost 250,000 sockeye in the Columbia a couple of years ago because the water is too hot. They die. And in the last couple of years, on several occasions, they haven't been able to go upstream to spawn. They need shade. They need shade now, and they need shade a lot more in the future as the climate continues to heat up. So we will be providing a proposal to have an incentive program, a voluntary program, to ask landowners to volunteer to provide shade, if you will, and tree canopy next to our streams and rivers. This is necessary if we're going to have salmon in our rivers in the future. I hope we can get this done this year. I want to talk about a few quick notes that I think may be of interest, and then David Schumacher will stand for any technical questions in regard. First, I want to say we realize, even though we've had a relatively good economy, even coming out of COVID, so many people still have been suffering the pangs of inflation and difficult times. That's why I'm really happy to announce that we are providing full funding for our working family tax credit. Legislators approved this in 2019, and beginning February 1, Washington families will be able to apply for the working family tax credit. This means that 400,000 Washington family households will be able to apply for deposits up to $1,200. It's a great credit. It's a great thing to do for working families, and I'm glad we're fully funding it. People can go to the Working Families Tax Credit.wa.gov to see if you are eligible. We recommend it to people. We've also funded subsidies for Cascade Care, which includes our state's public option health plan that provides low-income Washingtonians plans for less than $10 a month. We're funding cash assistance that's helping more than 9,000 families purchase diapers. And we're continuing utility assistance for thousands of low-income Washingtonians. In education, We know that social, emotional, and behavioral health supports for students remain so important. And we continue these investments and have added certain additional services for 3 to 5-year-olds. We are also continuing, this is particularly close to Trudy's and my heart, since we've been working on this since we went to the legislature in 1988, we're adding slots to our state's early learning program. And at the other end of the education spectrum, we're making important investments to help train hundreds of nurses and healthcare providers and mental health care specialists that are absolutely necessary to the health care of Washingtonians. And of course, we're making sure our agencies can adapt to the changing workforce. They need to be able to retain and recruit skilled workers in state service. And we have made provisions to make sure we can continue on that course. So I'm proud of our state. There's great things happening, but one of the reasons we're a great state, we've always risen to the moment. And we need to rise to this challenge of homelessness and mental health care needs and climate change, and we have a budget to do all those things. So I look forward to working with the legislature, and with that, happy to stand for questions. I think we're going to let Claire start us off. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you. I'm curious about the quest to ask voters to approve this $4 billion in bonds for housing. Given the state's workforce issues and issues with the supply chain, even if voters agree to approve this money, is there a guarantee that the housing is going to get built? And what might you do to address those other issues?
My sense is we will surmount those challenges. My sense with $4 billion, the industry will respond. In talking to industrial leaders, we believe they can expand their capacity. When we have issued additional investments to date, we almost always have got bids when we needed it and actually got the housing built. So the capacity of the industry has not been a restraint. I don't believe it will be a significant challenge. The challenge is dollars, and we need dollars to make sure that this can happen. Now, there's a couple other things I did not mention here. We also need to have land to build on. And unfortunately, we have some restrictions on land use in our state that makes it impossible to actually build housing in many of our urban areas. So we will be asking the legislature to free up some additional land to allow multifamily housing, particularly close to transit corridors. We think that has a good chance of passing, and it is absolutely necessary. I really do believe in the homelessness crisis. Sometimes it's just really easy to forget you need housing. And if you're going to have housing, you have to have a place to build it. And we need to free up more places to actually build housing. So this is a pivotal part of our ability. It would be a shame to finance $4 billion and then not have a place to build the houses. And that's the situation we could be in if we don't free up against some of the artificial restrictions on housing that we currently have. So I hope we can get some progress in that regard.
I have some follow-up questions on homelessness and housing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you, for the upcoming biennium, do you have a target number for the number of units you want to build?
Well, I believe, if, correct me if I'm wrong, I hope I gave you a number, that we think that the number that we shoot for is, I'm looking for the number specifically that I thought I gave you. Yeah, I think the package is for 26,000. I haven't broken it down by year. So, John, if our agencies have a number, I'll get it to you. I don't have a particular one broken down by year.
A couple more on the same subject. Is there a target purchase cost, like if I'm a family of four, are you trying to get houses that are for less than houses or units that are for less than 100? I would pay less than 100,000 or less than 50,000. Essentially, I'm coming at you on, can I afford to get the homeless housing.
The affordable housing targets purchasers who have incomes of 80% AMI or lower, and average median income, which I don't remember what that amounts to, but that's how the affordable housing is.
So there are multiple policies and pipelines of support. Each of them have, to some degree, some different qualifications. We have funding for those with mental health needs. We have funding for those with chemical addiction needs. We have multiple layers of support, if you will, that are dependent on your income. But I do also want to point out, we also need to build what you call middle housing. That's housing for people who are middle income people. We have to build additional middle housing as well, because if we don't, those people will move here from Ohio, get a good tech job, make $80,000 a year, and squeeze out the people making less, and the rents go up. And that's happening big time in our community right now. So we have to build middle housing as well, and we have some proposals to enable that to have happen. And instrumental to that is what I talked about, is freeing up land so we can build middle housing as well. So we need to build housing up and down the spectrum of income if we're going to solve this problem.
That segues neatly into my last question. Seattle, probably the biggest chunk of homeless people are in Seattle. Seattle has a very strong NIMBY atmosphere to it, and land in Seattle is super duper expensive. So where are you going to find land in Seattle, and how are you going to deal with the fact that as soon as you say, I'm going to put a low-income or a homeless housing place here, how are you going to deal with the neighborhood going to be going up in arms about it?
We are counting on you writing articles pointing out the genius of the Inslee budget, because I know people want to end homelessness, and there's only one way to do it, and that's build housing, and to get people to fundamentally understand that. By the way, I do want to point out, this is not just a Seattle problem. This is a statewide problem. Every community has a housing crisis in the state of Washington. I was in Spokane the other day, where the largest homelessness camp in the whole state is in Spokane. We're making progress on that. But it really is a statewide issue. It's not just a Seattle issue. Now, I do want to address this issue that we just have to grapple with the reality that change is necessary. The status quo will not solve this problem. We need changes. And that includes in some of our zoning requirements that today prohibit housing from being built, particularly denser housing, and that's why we need some changes in our zoning laws. We are going to propose some changes that, particularly near high-capacity transit corridors, we allow higher density housing to be built. Look, this is a physical principle. You have to have a place to build housing, and we're not creating more dirt. So you have to allow denser housing if we're going to solve this problem. So I have problems with folks who write editorials saying solve homelessness, but don't change zoning. Those are totally inconsistent. And that's a physical principle. So we need to come to grips with that and decide whether we're going to tackle homelessness or not. I'm in favor of doing that. I think the vast majority of Washingtonians are as well.
Governor, I have a three-part question for you.
Usually John has a three-part.
I
What,
know.
what is this? He does a three-part.
I'm taking inspiration from it. I'm curious to know why there's no more funding in your budget to expand the Office of Correctional Ombuds, so they have the resources to do the independent oversight resources we've done. This is a small agency. You signed this into law a few years ago because families, loved ones, there are people who are dying in prison or having health care. So they came to the legislature, they asked lawmakers and you, help us find out what's going on in there with our people. And the first 2 years, they released 52 oversight reports, looking at everything from suicide in the prisons to the COVID-19 response to how transgender people are treated in there. And then you made some new appointments, Sonia Hallam, your senior advisor, temporary appointment, and then later on Caitlin Robertson. They shelved a bunch of the reports. They reorganized the office. They contend that you've got to deal with some other issues in there statutorily to make sure you can do it. So I want to know why you're not adding more money to make sure they can still do the independent oversight reports. And the second part of the question is, when Sonia Hallam took over, she shelved a bunch of the oversight reports. Some of them have been released, some of them slimmed down version. There's still 3 reports that are still fully redacted. These are dated October 2021, that's used for emergency restraints. This is November 2021, this is disciplinary programs, oversight report. And this is also 2021 investigative report on health services, medically necessary accommodations. They're fully redacted. So I'd like to know what's in these reports that the state feels like people should know about.
Well, I'll try to get an answer for
My
you.
third question.
Yeah.
My third question I'm going to relay from Daniel Perez. He's an incarcerated individual in Monroe Correctional Complex. And your decisions to make those appointments deprived him of his voice in the public square. Because,
What are you referring to?
well, his story, he was retaliated against. The Department of Corrections acknowledged that it falsified his medical records to give him involuntary medication. And that report under Sonia Hallam was shelved for many months. And when Caitlin Robertson released the report, she took the names out. She took the stories of the prisoners out. So Daniel Perez, I interviewed him earlier this year. He called me up again venting. And I said, we spoke on the record. I asked if he consents to use his name. I said, what do you want to ask the governor about all this that's going on? And he said, he told me, this was early December, he said, I've called the Office of Correctional Ombuds. I've asked them to close my remaining complaints. I'm getting radio silence. They're not responding to my inquiries. It feels like a little bit of retaliation. I've lost faith in their office because their reports are becoming sanitized. And the question he asked is, I want to know if the Office of Correctional Ombuds is not living up to their standards. What is the process for an incarcerated person? What's a higher authority that would be able to look into these inactions and failures of the OCO?
Well, in answer your budgetary question, I'm not sure all, but probably almost 100% of agencies made requests that they didn't get because we don't have an infinite number of dollars and we have to make priority decisions. So in answer to your first question, we made priority decisions with the existing revenues that we have. Multiple agencies did not get what they requested, and that's the nature of budgeting. I assume it's the same in corrections. You've asked some specific questions about these reports. I want to get you the answers to that. I don't have them right now, so I suggest we talk again. I try to get an answer to those questions specifically, and I'll try to get you answers for those. I think the Ombudsman has been provided some useful information, and we've acted on it. I actually think in our COVID response, we had one of the lower fatality rates in the United States. It wasn't zero. We would like to have been zero. I knew there were complaints of people didn't get their clothing washed often enough. I wish it could have been total comfort during that period of time. It was not. But I will just say, coming through COVID, I think our Department of Corrections did about as good a job as you could do. I will stand by that. So yes, prisoners make some complaints. We want to make sure that we respond to them. And there have been imperfections in the Department of Correction. As you know, we had some tragedies in mental health care that was inadequate at the Monroe facility, as you know. Those have been rectified. We've acted. We've acted against the license of the physician who's responsible for that. So we take this responsibility for care of our incarcerated people seriously, and I look forward to continue to make improvements. But I will have another conversation with you to try to get you answers to those specific questions.
Thank you.
Governor, can I come back to homelessness for a second? There is some skepticism maybe in the public about putting more money into existing organizations that haven't reduced the number of homeless folks. Are you proposing that the state create new programs, or are you relying on the backbone of the existing homeless service provider and construction?
I think it's more the latter. We're not proposing some new particular agency to be responsible for this. I think the public's frustration is real, justifiable, and one I share. Look, we've been making massive investments in homelessness, but it has increased. During my time in the last several years, as I've indicated, we've put additional probably over $500 million, and yet homelessness has increased. That is enormously frustrating to me, as it is to citizens. So that is understandable, and I share it. But it is not because we're not building housing. We are building housing. It's not because we're not providing mental health care. We are providing mental health care. It's not because we're not actually helping people. We are helping people, and they are recovering. They're coming back into the workforce. They're going back to their families. We are succeeding with thousands of people. It's just that the deluge has increased because of economic circumstances, in part because of mental health challenges, in part caused by COVID, in large part because we have a successful economy. This is such a great irony that we have one of, if not the most successful economies in the United States, maybe on a historic level, which means everybody wants to move here. So you get 1 million people who move here, but you only build 300,000 units. The private sector is only building 300,000 units. So it's pretty obviously you're going to get a homelessness problem if that happens. So that's a bit of an irony to be punished with homelessness because of your economic success. But I believe in significant way that's true, and that's happened in California, it's happened in Oregon, it's happened in other states that have been economically successful as well. So yes, there is understandable frustration, but you can either decide to sit on it and be frustrated, or you can do something about it. I'm doing something about it. I want to really tackle this problem at the scale that is required, where we're not just kind of making a little wave or sprinkling pixie dust on it and thinking these people are going to go away somehow. They're not going to go away somehow. We need to solve this problem at its heart, and that's what I'm proposing that we do. Now, as far as distribution of the funds, I actually think not having one centralized state agency in charge of the whole kit and caboodle is probably a decent idea. I think we have to have community input. I think we have increased coordination, certainly in King County. That has been true, and we've had some successes. Our right-of-way initiative had some successes. We've had any number of people move off of our right-of-ways. So I don't intend to change dramatically the structure of the investment.
Governor,
But I should say this, but look, I'm open to ideas. I'm proposing ideas to legislature. If they've got some other ideas, I'm open ideas. What I'm not open to is passivity and inaction. We need action this day.
Can you tell me more about what you're doing to address workforce shortages, specifically in the healthcare and behavioral health settings? I mean, you talk a lot about building these facilities and increasing the number of beds, but we know that there are staff shortages and there might not be enough people to staff those facilities. And then second, just a kind of quick question. You've alluded to middle housing a couple times. Are you bringing that proposal back from last year? Are you pushing for that again this session?
Different proposal. This year, we're going to propose that we expand access for more than single-family dwellings along transportation corridors, heavy transportation corridors. So it would not be uniform throughout the city. But in areas that are substantial transportation corridors, we do believe higher density development is both advised and absolutely necessary to solve this problem. So we're working with legislators, with cities to refine a proposal to get that job done. And I'm somewhat optimistic that we can get this job done. It's a more incremental approach, and I think it's of the right scale to get the job done. As far as the workforce, we're doing a lot. It needs a lot. Our nursing shortage is critical. Our shortage of mental health professionals is critical. In the nursing side, we've increased slots at various colleges. We have increased our number of teaching professionals to make sure that we can actually recruit and pay for nurses to actually teach in these proposals. We've made a substantial investment in buying the robotic equipment, the little alleged dummies that actually aren't dummies. They're pretty incredible, that are so effective in nurses training. If you ever see it, it's really cool how they go in and treat this plastic alleged dummy and get great training. By the way, we're doing it in our schools too. I was at Mount Tahoma. Trudy and I were at Mount Tahoma a few weeks ago seeing high school students. So we're trying to get high school students thinking about healthcare fields, nursing, phlebotomists, x-ray techs, and we're getting 16, 17-year-olds now going through kind of like an internship in a way, and we have helped finance some of those efforts as well. So we're gonna keep it up. And by the way, you can't thank medical professional enough the last 2 years. What nurses have done, everyone deserves a Florence Nightingale Award during the COVID effort, and still now with the infectious disease rate that we're suffering right now, the Herculean efforts of these people is just incredible. And I could not have more respect for what they've done, and we want to get more nurses so that they have less overtime that they need to work. So we're committed to it.
Got a climate.
By the way, we've also increased some compensation to facilities that hire nurses so they can afford to pay adequate compensation to nurses as well. That's been very important to allow people to be discharged from hospitals that otherwise wouldn't have a place to go, and that's why we haven't had room in our hospitals. So we've increased compensation rates in other lower care facilities so they can pay nurses enough to actually have adequate staff.
There's two aspects, two challenges it looks like you're facing with the behavioral health facilities is inflation and neighborhood opposition. I mean, inflation has driven up the price of the Western State Hospital by more than $200 million since the last budget, and we see it, all the projects that are delayed across the board. So I'm wondering, what's your strategy? You can't do anything about inflation, but other projects are being delayed by neighborhood opposition in community centers. What's your strategy? Is there a policy for that?
Well, actually, we can do something about inflation, which is build it now rather than waiting 5 or 6 years when it's going to cost even more. So, you know, this is a big bill for the Western State Hospital, but it's going to be a lot bigger if we wait 5 or 6 years. So there is something we can in effect do in inflation, which is avoid higher prices later on. We're going to be encouraging legislators to step up to the line and actually make that investment. On the issue of community acceptance of these facilities, look, we need to be as good a listeners as possible to communities. Change is hard. Change in your neighborhood is hard. People have concerns. People have some stereotypes about these facilities that aren't really accurate, but they exist. And we need to be really good listeners to neighbors and communities about their concerns. And how can we ameliorate those concerns? You know, like this Catalyst facility in Spokane, you know, they're hiring full-time security. They have an AI system that actually does facial recognition when you come in and out. So they've provided really intensive security at the facility to try to ameliorate some of the neighbors' concerns. Have not eliminated some of those concerns, but certainly listened to them and responded to them. So first, we need to be good listeners. Second, we need to respond to people's legitimate concerns. Third, we have to have a combination of urgency and patience while we go through that listening effort. But if we do those things, we get success. And I'll tell you why. I've had this experience multiple times where I'll go to a site, like I was at a tiny village. This isn't a mental health hospital, but it has some similarities. I went to a tiny home village in Tacoma, was talking to folks, and it really looked like a well-run organization. The people lived there were really happy. They were getting some mental health treatment. I talked to this one woman, obviously had some mental health issues. It was really a successful enterprise, but when they started it, the community was up in arms. This is absurd. This is going to ruin the nature of the neighborhood on a very nice neighborhood in Tacoma. And it was very controversial. Within 3 months, like the neighborhood adopted all these people living in this tiny home village. They're bringing in food for potlucks. They're having parties together. They quickly become embraced by the neighborhood. And you see this time and time again. And so it's an age-old issue that change is hard, but it can become very positive, and you just have enough resolution to carry that out.
Governor, one climate question. It's a little bit specialized, and I'm kind of curious how involved you were in the proviso to set up a site selection for a better pumped storage hydro facility along the Columbia River, which I think might replace, and you can fill me in how much you were involved in this, the Klickitat County proposal that the Yakima Nation is just adamantly against happening near Goldendale. Did this come out of meetings you had with either developers or
Well, I'm certainly aware.
Yakima Nation?
I'm aware of the proposal. I'm aware the Yakima Nation has some concerns about the proposal. I'm not, right now, off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly what's in the budget specific to that project. That's not ringing a bell with me right now. We have proposed different siting systems to have a more coordinated response between multiple agencies to make our siting efforts better. So we listen better, we listen earlier, and then we make a decision in a timely fashion. There is a proposal to do that. I am aware of that. I'm not sure that's specific to the pump storage facility, though.
storage and a site line and a number, and
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on this, on that particular one. It is important, I will say this, having storage is extremely important to have electrical storage if we're going to use our renewable resources. It's absolutely imperative to find some way to store energy so that when the sun shines, we can store that energy for days it's cloudy. And, you know, those efforts are very important. It's also very important to honor our obligation with the tribal community and to make sure that we listen to those concerns. I have had a really good discussion with the Yakima leadership just a couple months ago to continue to perfect that listening process that we have. That's very important as well.
Another climate change question. Your new Clean Energy Siting Council, which is members of the various state agencies, how is that different from FSEC? Because that FSEC pretty much does the same thing. And would this take local, and also wind farms and solar farms have the option of either going through the state or going through the county governments? We have this, it's sort of a weird situation. Will this affect developers being able to go through local governments instead of the state?
Well, the goal of this is to coordinate multiple agencies earlier in the process so that everyone can make permitting decisions earlier in the process. That's the goal. It doesn't replace, I don't believe, the FSEC process. As far as relationship with local communities, I'd like Anna Lysing or Becky Kelly to call you and talk about those specifics, to answer your specific question.
Okay.
So I'll ask them to call you.
It seems like this council does the exact same thing that FSEC does.
I don't think it is. It is not designed to have the same. FSEC is not a coordinating body amongst multiple agencies. It doesn't really have that function. It's just a permitting. So it is a different effort. But if I can have Anna or Becky call you and talk about the specifics on that, I'll do that.
Governor, I have a question about abortion. I know your budget covers some resources for abortion services, but I'm curious about policy. Are you still planning to push for an amendment to the state's constitution to protect the right to an abortion?
Yes. I do believe this is an important right that needs to be permanently enshrined in our Constitution. There are still efforts in our state to take away that right of a woman, and it's necessary to have that enshrined in the Constitution. So yes, I will ask legislators to act.
Governor, I didn't see this in your budget. Maybe
Let her finish. Sure. Come back.
Sorry, I just want to understand, given the kind of high threshold to passing that in the legislature, what's your strategy or plan as far as gaining support for that?
Our plan is to take the first step, which is to ask legislators to pass it, which we're doing and will do. I'll be talking to legislators to encourage them to step up the plate and act. I'll be encouraging Republicans to support this effort. I think that that's the sentiments of Washingtonians very strongly throughout the state of Washington. I'll ask legislators of both parties to respect that, and I'll do everything I can to get this passed. I think it's imperative. I wish it was not so. The public support for a right of choice is so strong in the state of Washington. It's very disappointing to me that there's only one party that's standing up for it right now. It's very disappointing to me. So we need a constitutional amendment.
Blake, the court decision, the lawmakers are going to have to figure out policy around that. And I didn't see it in your budget, but I may have missed it. But do you anticipate costs associated with that for drug treatment or other stuff for the courts in this budget cycle?
It's a possibility. I don't think I have proposed a specific dollar for any particular response to Blake, but it is a possibility depending on what legislators want to do with that issue. So that remains to be discussed with the legislature. Thank you very much. Hope you have happy holidays. Santa's going to bring us a good budget. Thank you.